So Elyce, I'm so excited to finally get to talk to you about your gorgeous book, What Price Hollywood. I was wondering if you could start off by telling us a bit about Cucor, his life, and also like why you became interested in him. What has drawn you to him as a filmmaker?
Thank you, Erica. It's great to be here and talk about the book and see lots of faces. I see very few faces lately, especially over break before I teach again. So George Cukor was a second generation immigrant from a Jewish Hungarian family. So Central Europe there wasn't a lot of discussion of ethnicity. He wanted to be an American. And then when he was a director, he didn't want to be a Jewish director. He wanted to be a successful director. He was also interested in the theater from a very young age. So he spent his younger years in New York and did a lot of hanging around behind the scenes, sneaking away from school to watch theater productions and that kind of thing. And he was driven from a young age to be a success. In particular, he thought he might first be an actor, then he decided he was not going to be an actor. And then he wanted to be a director. And so he did some work in theater, and he was brought out to Hollywood with the advent of sound to be a vocal coach. And that issue of sounding educated was important to him. And so he would work with actors on their voices. And I think that, again, to me, speaks of that Jewish American experience. He interests me because, one, I liked some of his films when I was young. I didn't put them all together. I didn't know there was one director behind multiple films, but I particularly liked his work with Cary Grant and Katharine Hepburn. I really liked Philadelphia Story. When I was about 14 years old, I played the daughter in a community theater production of it. And so that got me even more interested in it. Yeah, I hadn't, and we modernized it. So instead of when she does her ballet and says, you know, she can play piano and dance at the same time, we had me do something like I sang Play That Funky Music White Boy or something and dance to it or that kind of thing. It really didn't work. It's not a play that really needs to be redone. And I wasn't aware of some of the more sexist aspects of it until much older, but I enjoyed the play, and that made me watch the movie, and watching that movie made me watch others with that pairing of Katharine Hepburn and Cary Grant. And the other one that I really loved was Holiday, which is much less known. And so after I watched Holiday once, my friend from high school, my best buddy, and I watched Holiday multiple times. If it was on TV, we would watch it whenever we could. We'd find it, if we found it in the TV guide, because that's back in the, pre-cable, early VHS days. Mm-hmm. And also, I wasn't a big fan of My Fair Lady, but there were some songs I liked in it. I eventually played Henry Higgins' mother in a stage production of that one, and came to enjoy that role and some of the other smaller roles and that kind of thing in it, and that I began to appreciate. And I found that when I was looking things up, other than bringing up Baby, Cucor also he didn't direct that film, but he did direct Sylvia Scarlett. And so I started realizing I was watching more and more Cucor's films without really knowing that they were Cucor. And I was looking for a project when I switched. Oh, that's great. Anna just put up a note saying Holiday's available on Criterion Channel. I would love to do just a talk on Holiday. It's my favorite Cukor film, I think. And I was looking for a project because I had done a lot of work. Okay, so got my PhD, did work in literature, mostly in science fiction and race and gender. I wrote my dissertation on a Black feminist science fiction writer, Octavia Butler. And then I started doing more TV stuff. So I was writing articles on Buffy and Xena and chapters for books and things like that. And I found that I was much more interested in film and film theory. And so I wrote some pieces on the Stepford Wives that were published and found myself getting more into film theory. So I'm kind of a self-educated film critic, film theory person. And what was I going to do? And I realized that the classics were really what I spent more time watching. And I said, well, what if I invest in this? And I found someone looking for pieces that dealt with bisexuality. And it was the Journal of Homosexuality was doing a bisexual media issue. And I said, you know, Cukor directed a number of films with these figures positioned within romantic triangles where they seem to be as attracted to the man as the woman. So in Philadelphia Story, the Jimmy Stewart character is really interested in Cary Grant. And in one scene in Philadelphia Story, he talks about that he's Cinderella, he's drunk. And he said, I'm Cinderella, and I'm going to my prince. Right. And he opens the door and there's Cary Grant in this plush bathrobe, very princely. Right. And of course, he's also in love with Tracy, with Katharine Hepburn's character. And I said, are there other films like that? And I watched Sylvia Scarlett, which is a gender bending kind of romp that has kind of a triangle in it as well. And Holiday has a triangle where the brother character, who is an alcoholic and doesn't date anyone and seems queerly positioned to me. He seems to be as attracted to Cary Grant's character as both of the sisters are in that film, the Katharine Hepburn character and Doris Nolan, who plays the sister that is first engaged to him. And so I wrote that article and I thought, that's it. I've got my Cukor thing done. That was really fun. And I started finding other things like that there's cross-dressing, women cross-dressing in a bunch of Cukor films. Right. And as I found these patterns, I said, are there enough interesting patterns related to gender and sexuality that I could actually do a book over it? And so this is over a number of years. I just kept finding myself going back to it. I would do other things, but I kept coming back to it. And eventually my retired colleague, Linda Badley, who has written and published a whole lot on film, horror and Gothic are her specialties, but she published a lot on it. She was working with the Edinburgh University Press. And she said, I'm bringing their editor here, their head editor, one of their main acquisitions editors, Gillian Leslie, to our campus from England. And she wants to talk to people. And so I said, okay, I'll talk to her. And when I talked to her about the book, she was immediately interested. And she was prompting me and asking me questions and encouraging me. Bridget Stewart just wrote that Linda taught her first class. She's just an amazing, amazing person and teacher. And I'm going to be, the Liminal Noir book is likely to be published with Edinburgh University Press under one of the series that Linda Badley is head editor for. And Gillian Leslie really inspired me. But they right when I was working on publishing or, submitting a proposal to her, Edinburgh University Press put out a book she didn't know they were putting out, which is an edited collection on Cukor, in which they have writers write on just about every single film, like all 50 films that Cukor directed, and in different chapters, some that work better than others, because they only wanted one in each chapter. And I found with my book that I was overlapping. Some films interest me in multiple ways. Some films didn't particularly interest me. And I got a lot of encouragement. And I ended up at U Press of Kentucky, where Ann Dean Dotson, who is one of their editors, leapt on it. She said, I like the gender stuff. We want to increase our offerings in issues of sexuality in film. And that drew me. So like, that's most of the answer. The last bit of the answer and then you can ask me more questions. I tend to just riff. Is that while I was writing, it started seeming like it was shared. It was meant to be, because Cucor's mother was named Helen, and my mom is Helene, and I think she's watching right now. Hi, Mom. She's a scholar too, and has done wonderful stuff on women in work and women in the internet and stuff. So I got inspiration for my scholarship from her. But Cucor's mother was Helen, his father was Victor, and so was mine. And my dad was an actor who used to sneak in to the movies and skip school, not theater, but in Chicago, he would sneak into the movies and ditch school. And then his sister's name was Elsie, and my name is Elyce. I'm like, okay, something's going on here, at least a really great coincidence. And so it felt like meant to be. And it brought together a lot of my interests. So I could talk about gender, Jewishness and ethnicity, a little bit about race and class and sexuality in a way that I didn't know I could. Because I've done a lot of editing of books and writing of articles, but this is the first scholarly book that I wrote. And I just really enjoyed continuing to discover new things as I was writing that helped me understand Cukor as someone who was pigeonholed in many ways in Hollywood and worked and struggled against it in many ways. I have the epigraph to the book is, heaven knows everyone has his limitations, but why make them any narrower than they already are? And so that was kind of a motivation for the book is, can you work in Hollywood? What is the price of working in Hollywood? And in what ways did he push boundaries?
Yeah, that sounds amazing. I'm so fascinated by his film, The Women, which I think had so much potential, like to be a feminist film, and it somewhat is, but it doesn't quite get there. Like it's almost there, and then oh no, and then it's almost there again, and then you're like, well, but it's so interesting that it was made in what, 1939, and there are no men in the film, no male voices. There's not a man in sight, and there's got to be at least 100 women. I mean, it starts off in this like fitness center spa, and the women are just talking and talking, and there's all these conversations going over each other and under each other. It's just like, it's hilarious. And then even though there isn't a man anywhere, the film still revolves around men, but I was so interested in the female friendships and what you had to say about how Cucor's films like adhered to and challenged notions of female friendships. And I wanted to hear you talk about that a bit.
Well, so as far as the women is concerned, yes, over like 120 some women and no men, but some of the ads would say things like, it features all women, but it's all about men. And it is all about men. I mean, the last shot of the film is Norma Shearer reaching her arms out to her husband, who's described as an Adonis.
Yeah.
And, she forgives him for cheating on her. She never cheats on him. A lot of that in classic Hollywood. Another great Cary Grant film that Cukor did not direct, The Awful Truth. From the very beginning of the film that he's cheated on her. He's got a tan, but it was raining where he was. So he's been somewhere and he's getting a fake tan so his wife won't know. And then she goes, well, I heard it was raining. And then he's just busted, and she never does. So that idea that men are to be forgiven is definitely in there. And as you said, there are feminist elements to it. And then a lot of people compare it to Sex and the City.
I hadn't thought about that.
And in fact, Nixon, who direct Sex and the City, write Sex and the City.
Cynthia Nixon.
Yes, directed.
The actors. Maybe she was directing later, but yeah, Cynthia Nixon.
They made a version of The Women in 2004 that was a complete flop because it doesn't work now.
Yeah, right.
The way it did then. And it Nixon was in it. She must have been in it, not directing it. and so I said, I don't want to look at, in one of the chapters, I do talk a little bit about some of its failures. And one of my biggest thoughts about one of its failures is that the play is a satire of catty women, catty privileged women, right? Very privileged, privileged class white women who mostly don't work. And you can't have a satire if you've got real earnestness in it. And Norma Shearer's character is portrayed, Mary, the main character, is so earnest that you laugh at the other characters, but not her. And so it exemplifies one of the things that I think about Cukor generally, which is he would have, even in films that didn't quite work, and in some of his films that completely flopped, he would have these amazing performances or amazing scenes or characters within an overall film that didn't quite work. He was called an actor's director because he loved to work with individual actors and draw the best performances out of them. He absolutely loved when Rosalind Russell auditioned for the women in that very over-the-top way that she performs. A lot of physical comedy when her character is exercising and she's flopping everywhere, or that kind of thing. Or she wears these strange dresses with
and those hats
with eyeballs on them and hats. Yes. And he loved that. Does that work? It works for Rosalind Russell, and it's very funny. But up next to Mary, who's so very serious, it's hard. You know, at one point they're friends, and at another point, randomly in the film, she calls her cousin.
Right.
So I don't know if they're friends or cousins. I don't quite know. And there's a lot of other slapstick in the film, like the older woman, the Countess de Lave, who is always saying, l'amour, l'amour, toujours l'amour. And she's been married a whole bunch of times and and that kind of stuff, and falls for another man. The character that interests me most in the women is the character played by Joan Crawford. She is a working class girl. And she has to scrape to get what she can. And one of the things she can is to steal someone else's husband. By the way, if someone's husband goes off on them, it leaves them, that's not stealing. That's the man having an affair. It's you can't steal someone. You can convince them. And so I'm interested in her primarily because by the end of the film, Mary has given into tradition and is going back to her husband. There's that whole issue of her mother telling her to not have pride about these kinds of things. This is just what men do. And in the end, she has to. She grows claws, as they're depicted on the cover of the book, right? Jungle red. And she is able to get her man back. But who wants this guy after this?
Right.
He actually marries Joan Crawford's character, Crystal. But Crystal, as she leaves the film, says, well, it's back to the perfume counter for me. This is life. I'm just going to go back to what I was doing before, as opposed to you spoiled women who are either going to be married or divorced, but have enough money and don't have to worry about stuff like this. So I'm drawn to that working class, tough woman character, as opposed to Mary, who we're sympathetic with, but is very privileged and compromises a lot. You also have those, Crystal, as opposed to those dutiful servants that are a little gossipy, but like the maid is crying. The lady's maid is crying because
they're having this huge fight, you know, Mary and her husband. And we still don't hear him. We just hear what she's saying. And the maid goes downstairs and she's talking to another woman who works in the house in the kitchen, and they're drinking coffee, and they're going back and forth talking about it, and they sympathize with Mary. And it's just this really wonderful, authentic exchange that to me just made Mary seem kind of ridiculous, you know, because they were so real.
And does she, their devotion to her, on the other hand, is very classist. And when Cucor was interviewed about these kinds of things, he said, I love the rich. Doesn't everyone? And his interviewer, I think it was Gavin Lambert at the time, was like, not necessarily. He did. He admired the rich. He wanted to be rich. He was eventually rich. He wanted great success. And I consider that part of the you know, child of immigrants kind of experience, wanting to make good.
Mhm.
He was very insecure about some other facets of his life, about his looks. He was heavy when he was young, and he, didn't wasn't considered good looking,
Mhm.
and he was gay. And so that links back to the women, because one of the reasons he was given the film was in some ways as a consolation prize for losing Gone with the Wind,
Mm.
which came
Oh,
out the
wow.
same year
Right.
as also did Wizard of Oz. And he worked on that film as well.
Mhm.
Uncredited, he helped direct some of the scenes in Wizard of Oz. But his story with Gone with the Wind was one of a man who really wanted to direct that film and felt it was, well, if you think about that film, it is not an action adventure film. It is Scarlett's film. It's a romance in many ways. And I won't go into how I find it. I can't watch it. I cringe. I stand with Hattie
Yeah.
McDaniel, who said, my choices at the time in Hollywood were, I can play a maid or a mammy, or I can be a maid.
Mhm.
So I played maids, and I got
Yeah.
paid better and had more respect for it. Nonetheless, I find it's romance of the South painful. But Cukor was doing a great job, and some of his scenes are still in the film, like the scene where she's a widow and dancing, with the scandalous dancing widow scene. Uh, and he was doing well, and people liked him. But Clark Gable, the big star, did not like him, and felt, Clark Gable said he was throwing the film to Vivien Leigh. Well, if it's not Scarlett's film, whose is it? It's not Rhett's film.
Mhm.
That would be a very different film. But he said he wanted a more manly director. And
Mhm.
so, in addition to being called an actor's director, Cukor was also called a woman's director.
Yeah.
Positive side of that, like the film The Women, positive side, he could direct all the stars of the day and stick them all in one film together and help them get along. He did really well. He is famous for having directed difficult women, who today we would probably just call independent, strong women.
Yeah.
Joan Crawford, Katharine Hepburn. He directed a number of films with Katharine Hepburn, made her career basically. Judy Garland, Judy Holliday, Marilyn Monroe. He directed these difficult, strong women. He directed the last film that Greta Garbo ever made, which is just it's almost unwatchable. It's Garbo and Melvyn Douglas in a romantic comedy that's kind of based on one of those mistaking one twin for the other kind of thing, with a fake twin and two-faced woman. It's called. It's painful, and she stopped being in films after it. She just said it was a flop, and she had fears of aging and just never made another one with her. But he did make her film Camille. He made the film Camille, which was a big hit based on the classic. So he dealt with these women, and you can say that's a very positive thing. He was willing to work with these strong women and help them with their careers, to show them at their best, to help Judy Garland revive her career, to try to help Marilyn Monroe to actually show up to the set sober and ready to work, to show people how wonderful Judy Holliday, the comedian, was, where she faced sexism and anti-Semitism. I mean, Harry Cohn called her, that I don't want to work with that fat Jew broad, those kinds of things. This is among Jews. He's Jewish too. But this idea that she had a fat ass was said to her over and over.
Wow.
That kind of language. She was constantly dieting and died very young of breast cancer. But Cukor worked with these women. Say?
Like 44 years old.
Very young.
She's incredible. And so, yeah, I wanted to talk about Born Yesterday because it completely knocks me out. Her character, Billy Dawn, is, if you guys haven't seen it, it's like a kind of like a Pygmalion, but it's so much better than My Fair Lady, because it's really about her self-actualization, and it's about an intellectual curiosity. And the pursuit of knowledge and
Yeah.
an understanding of history and her place in it. And the romance is completely incidental. Like, it's not a big deal. You're like, oh yeah, of course this is going to happen. Like, handsome journalist gave her a book and taught her a few words, and she just takes off. She just makes
Yes.
it into
Yes.
something much, much, much more than he would have imagined, and that her thug husband ever would have
Yeah.
imagined. So this film also, you know, presents two different, I think, types of masculinity. And you talk in your book about this. I'm not sure how to say the word. This edelkeit.
Edelkeit. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. This like male nobility that emphasizes delicacy and gentleness over courage and um, and it's to say it's an Eastern European Jewish ideal. So can you talk a little bit about masculinity in Cucor's films?
Yeah. I can start with Born Yesterday, because in Born Yesterday, you've got the crass Harry Brock, right? Money making, deals in scrap metal, tells the story of his youth with stealing from one person, stealing from the back of the lot, bringing it around and selling it again and stuff. And so there you've got this kind of, he's very crude. He takes his shoes off and rubs his feet in front of other people, all that kind of stuff. And so he's not, he's a blowhard and he's abusive emotionally and physically. So you're not sympathetic with him. He's the wrong path.
Mm-hmm.
And you've got class issues going on there. And one of the things that Billy Dawn is able to do is move up in class through her behavior, where Harry is not. He will end up in prison.
Right.
He even is able to coax his lawyer to become, whatever, Rudy Giuliani for him, right? To do all these things that are not particularly legal, kosher, or that kind of thing. And as Billy becomes aware that what she is doing is illegal, she doesn't want to be part of it.
Right.
And as you say, she's guided by William Holden's character, the Paul Verrill is his name. And Verrill is not virile in a traditional masculine sense. One of the things I most love about the film is that in his relationship with Billy, he wants her to stop flirting with him and get serious and learn things. Mm-hmm. And he wants to help her. He's hired as a tutor, not to seduce her. She seduces him.
Yeah.
So he teaches her to value the intellect. It's a bit corny, the representation of the way she learns is by reading the founding fathers.
Right.
She doesn't read the founding mothers. She doesn't read diversely. She reads the history of white men in America. But it lets us know in terms of ethnicity that there are paths other than the kind of working class, push your way through and become rich, but have no intelligence or class. Mm-hmm. Whereas she goes that path. And then for Paul Verrill, she's able to take the gentleness of his guidance. She's able to encourage him to feel good about himself and what he's doing, and also to appreciate her open sexuality. I'm also drawn to the fact that in their relationship, she doesn't suddenly get a different voice. She does put on glasses, but she keeps her own style. But she does not stop talking like this. She does not drop that ethnic voice, that Jewish loudness, as I read it. And I kind of like that. It prefigures what will happen in the 60s and 70s with Barbra Streisand and Woody Allen, where being very ethnic can be seen as beautiful and sexy. And so I like that film for its challenge to, there are ways to go about becoming American, and that you don't have to give up your voice as a woman or just as an ethnic American.
Yeah.
Cukor himself did not like Jewish American. He just wanted to be American
Mhm.
and director. And he did not, not a gay director, not a
Mhm.
Jewish director. He wanted to just be a successful director.
Right.
But this is where, I think he works with Hollywood to challenge some of the gendered ethnic kind of norms. And you see it in Born Yesterday. You see it in the other film that the big film that Judy Holliday made with him, which is It Should Happen to You,
Mhm.
where she plays a character that just puts up billboards with her name on them with the last of her money when she loses her job as a girdle model. She comes to New York to be an actress, and she's a girdle model, and for 3/4 of an inch, she's fired, which really echoes her own experiences.
Yeah.
And instead she says, well, I got a little money. I'm going to have to go back home to Podunk soon. So I'm going to spend my money on billboards just with her name on them. And he lets her win. In a lot of ways, she makes a lot of money. She sells, some soap company wants her billboard, so she bargains it for 2 or 3 more. And her name is just everywhere. And of course, it's about empty celebrity. But again, it's about that women's voices, women speaking out, and the way the shots are filmed, you're always focused on her thrilled face as these things happen, as opposed to people reacting to her.
Mhm.
It doesn't have a feminist ending, right? This is Hollywood. So the ending is she marries Jack Lemmon's neurotic character, who is constantly telling her to come down and stop doing this empty celebrity stuff. But she finds her voice, and I like that about her. She doesn't marry the rich soap guy played ridiculously by Peter Lawford. But Cucor wasn't crazy about Lawford, but he was given him. And so I've gone off of masculinity. I'm talking more about ethnic femininity. But as far as that concept of Edelkeit is concerned, and Vince, who's here on the call, Vince Brooke, called that kind of the book's coup, or like a part of the heart of the book, which is that as far as masculinity is concerned, he has a lot of blowhard characters that don't win or don't succeed. He has, you see that in like Dinner at 8. There's also, gosh darn it, who plays the blowhard opposite Jean Harlow in that film? I cannot remember. But somebody very famous.
Wallace Berry.
Was it Wallace Berry? Thank you. He doesn't end up kind of as the center, the heart of the film. And in that film and several others, he depicts these kind of alcoholic men. But again, my favorite character of all of Cucor's characters was in Holiday, where you have a character who is being beaten down by his father and the rich banking family to which he's born into. And while Katharine Hepburn sees Cary Grant's character, who is working class boy made good, Ayres' character, Lou Ayres played him when very young, after he came off of getting great success in All Quiet on the Western Front. And he plays this very sensitive character who drinks to cover up his pain and helps his sister to go off with Johnny. And at the end of the film, she says, I'll come back for you. She says, why don't you just go with us? And he says, I can't, because he's trapped, because he's the heir to the banking throne. And he's also, I would argue, trapped because he's this sensitive, sweet guy in a world that isn't made for him. Neither of those characters are rendered as Jewish, Paul Verrill or him. They're not depicted as Jewish. And Edelkeit comes from kind of medieval rabbis, where there was a sense of, you didn't have a requirement of chastity or anything like that. They were married, and they were considered a very attractive type for being intellectual and caring about other people. And it's an alternative to the macho straight male. And Cukor has, I'm trying to think, very few macho straight men who are not the villains or made fun of in his films. When he has macho straight men, they're made fun of. And some of them really hate it. Like Anthony Quinn was in several films with Cukor. He was in Wild as the Wind opposite Anna Magnani, who had just come off of doing the Rose Tattoo and was a force to be reckoned with. And he was in a weird Western musical about a theatrical troupe. Theatricality is central to a lot of his films, performing gender in a lot of them, where Sophia Loren wears a huge blonde, platinum blonde wig, just strange. And Quinn plays the guy who's kind of, he's so besotted with her, she gets away with anything she wants to do. And it's a comedy. And Anthony Quinn was like, basically said Cukor emasculated me in that role. I was playing some kind of homosexual, where there's that link between femininity and homosexuality that Cukor lived through personally, where he was this woman's director. And the other half of woman's director is you direct strong women, but you're only fit to direct women because you're gay. And homosexuality, particularly at that time, it was linked with femininity and still can be. Yeah, I'm going to just pause because I'll just keep going. But I hope that's giving you some of
it is.
what you're interested
Do you know anything
in.
about his relationship with Cary Grant?
I know very little about it. He was much more drawn to working closely with the women in films. And so he was very close with Kate Hepburn. He directed her in her first film, and then he directed her in the several films with Grant. But there's not a lot of writing about any kind of real relationship. He had a stronger relationship in some ways with Spencer Tracy, because when Katharine Hepburn was having her relationship with Spencer Tracy, who was married in a Catholic marriage that he and his wife would not divorce him, he lived with Katharine Hepburn in the pool house attached to Cucor's mansion.
Oh, really?
And so he was close to both of them. And Spencer Tracy was one of those kind of manly men. He didn't understand Cukor, and he didn't see the world the way he did. And he said Cukor was a fussy director who kept giving him direction. A lot of the women and some of the young men liked, he would do line readings for people. He would get up on stage and say, okay, this is what I want it more like. And mostly Spencer Tracy felt that acting was a lot of nonsense and you just get up and do your thing. Whereas Katharine Hepburn was much more into style. And some of the later actors he directed, he also didn't like method actors like Tony Franciosa in Wild as the Wind and Anya Magnani, and some of the other people he worked with were method actors. And Cukor couldn't really relate to that either. So he was somewhere in between. Work really hard on your craft, but don't live it. On the other hand, don't think it's something where you just walk on stage and do your thing. It's why, who was the one that Katharine Hepburn really didn't like? There were a couple of actors she really didn't like working with because, she didn't like, gosh darn it, what's his name? Out of the Past.
Robert Mitchum?
Yeah,
Robert Mitchum?
She didn't like Robert Mitchum because Mitchum, like Spencer Tracy said, you just get up there and you just do it. That's acting, is just doing it. And so it's strange that he had that relationship with Spencer Tracy, but mostly Spencer Tracy was honorable and beholden to him. And so he didn't speak negatively about Cukor, where by contrast, when he directed his Indian epic, he had Stuart Granger was dumped on him, and Cukor did not like Stuart Granger, felt that he was just a pretty face and not a good actor. And Spencer Tracy said, I'm not going to let this little homosexual Jew tell me how to act and that kind of stuff. So there were people who would bring up his homosexuality and or his Jewishness to denounce him as a director. Sadly, that character that I like so much from Holiday, Lou Ayres, also was a little afraid of Cukor. Cukor really liked him in All Quiet on the Western Front. And Lou Ayres, you'll know probably best from, what's his name? What was he? Dr. Kildare. Dr. Kildare? I think it was Dr. Kildare. I'm probably wrong because I'm mentioning too many names and too many things, but he moved to TV and he didn't get a lot of leading roles or that kind of thing. But Cukor enhanced the role, especially for Lou Ayres, of this Ned character, expanded it from the play. And I think it was because of that idea of feeling trapped and the issues of Edelkeit and that kind of thing, that he really was drawn to this character. But Lou Ayres said, Cukor said, I'll come over to your apartment and we can read the character together. And Ayres wouldn't let him come over to his apartment because he was afraid Cukor was going to make a pass at him. And he later apologized and kind of said, no, he never did anything. But that idea of because you're gay, you make passes randomly at other men, as opposed to just you're attracted to some people, you're not attracted to others, plagued Cukor as well.
I think about him so often because the word gaslighting is used all over the place. Everybody uses it. Almost everybody knows what gaslighting is.
Yeah.
You see it like on threads on Facebook constantly of people arguing all kinds of different points, you know? And that film was so devastating, and it just shows this understanding of the way abuse happens, you know? I think in such a devastating way. Yeah, and just learning more about him through your book has made me even kind of more sympathetic to his vision, I think, and the way that he directed that piece, you know?
Yeah, he's not all that well known because, unlike, say, someone like Hitchcock, he didn't do 90% of his films all in one genre or subgenre. He's not known for thrillers, or he's not known for stylistic elements that you can find in certain directors over and over again, or working with the same actor. He did work with certain actors in 3 or 4 films and up to like 10 with Katharine Hepburn. He did do a lot of that, but he, it's notable that the long take, where basically you let characters act out a scene and you don't cut the scene, was one of the things that he did really well. And that goes with that idea of being an actor's director, that he really wanted the power of scenes. He also did some crane shots and long shots and things like that, up and down stairways and things like that, that he's not given much credit for. But he's not primarily a stylist. Some critics call him kind of like I think Barton Palmer calls him like, he was the consummate host. He makes this movie and invites you into it, and then he steps back. He would have cinematographers he trusted, and he even had color specialists and things like that, that he would have them do a lot of the work. It's not that he just stepped back and did nothing, but he trusted the people he worked with, and was really good at films that were made together. It wasn't just him on top and he tells you what to do. He liked to work. He was a great collaborator. I think so. And I enjoyed looking at, I didn't argue he's a radical.
Right, yeah.
I mean, when people talk about him, like one of my favorite critics who died way too young, Alexander Doty, talks about him, what does it mean to call him a gay director and then celebrate that, when he went along so much with the heteronormative norms of Hollywood, the happy ever after hetero endings. So you can celebrate his work, or you can say he just went along with what he was asked to go along with. And I wanted to kind of thread that in between the two. So we can ask that question that I ask in the title, and also the other thing that's important to me about Gaslight is it's one of the films that shows he was capable of directing in multiple genres and not fully appreciated for that. A lot of people I know assume that Gaslight is a Hitchcock film until they're told, no, it's Cukor. And they go, Cukor? You mean My Fair Lady guy? The guy that directed Philadelphia Story. Right. And so, yes, he did an excellent job. The details in that film are great. The other thing that's really fun to know about that film, just as a kind of, whatever, in the kind of fans of that film, there was a 1940 British film that I don't think is quite as potent or detailed or ornate as the American version, but the studio tried to get rid of every single print they could of that 1940 film so that no one would see it before they saw the 44 film. There was some underhanded trickery. as far as that film is concerned. But it is a great film for showing that he could do period films, which he also did. I mean, he directed David Copperfield and famously cast W.C. Fields in it. I mean, he did a lot of really interesting things. He did that one Western, campy as it was. He had women dressed as men, women in drag. He did a lot in 3 or 4 films at a time. And so my book kind of works through case studies.
Yeah.
I'm going to talk about women's friendship, not in all of his films, but in 3 or 4 particularly interesting films where we see whether there's a possibility of women to truly be friends in what we call a feminist way, that empower each other as opposed to tearing each other down, and how difficult Hollywood made that. Basically his biggest success of that is before the code was in his pre-code films, where you could show 2 women in a bed together.
Right. Yeah.
And things like that. And you don't know if they're lovers or friends or whatever, but their friendship is sincere throughout. And then the later you go into the classic period in the 30s and 40s, and especially in the 50s, you get more woman versus man and not women with women.
Right. Let's turn to questions that are in the chat.
Awesome.
Somebody, I think Dave.
There was one comment someone made that I wanted to look at. Some of Cucor's films epitomize the mid-Atlantic accent. Yes, like Holiday. So I definitely, is it Dave? I definitely agree. That was the Hollywood norm. That was what he was brought out there to do, is to teach everyone to speak. I mean, Katharine Hepburn sounds, she was deemed totally affected by many directors, and also had a point where she was box office poison until Cucor gave her character a real comeuppance in the Philadelphia Story. And then people started liking her again. Yes, Cucor himself absolutely was conflicted. And one of the ways we know this is he was an Anglophile. So he talked about loving the Swedes and Swedish women. So there he is loving, this, whatever you want to call it, I'll just say Aryan type of appearance. And at the same rate, he would spell things with British spelling. Pretentiously would spell color with a U, honor with a U, and he would sign off on his cards in very, pretentious kind of fashion. And he would have, I love the story of it, he would have dinner parties. Well, on the one side of town, you have Cole Porter, who is having naked male pool parties. And on the other end of town on Sundays, Cucor is having dinner parties for the elite of Hollywood. So some of his favorite people were Laurence Olivier and Vivien Leigh, and they would always be at his parties. But then he would tell crass jokes and use slurs like kike, and I hate to say these things, and the F word for gay men. He would say these things as part of jokes that showed he had a real conflicted identity. That he was always negotiating it. He would probably disagree with me and say he knew who he was and what he was doing. And everything was intentional, and he loved rich people and he wanted to be rich and all that stuff. And that all may be true. But while he was having these dinner parties, as he got older, he never had a serious relationship with another man until very late in life. And then the family really thought that man was just exploiting him. But one of the things he would do is have these dinner parties, and he'd have people bring young, handsome men who wanted to break into Hollywood. And Cucor would sleep with them and then give them a walk-on role or things like that. And so he had a lot of one-night stands. He did not have relationships. So a lot of conflict all over the place, which makes me feel for him. But then his crassness and his wanting to be one of the guys, he never wanted to be thought of as effeminate, flouncy, things like that. So he was very conflicted, and that shows, as Dave said, in the voices and in how some of the characters talk. While in the 50s, he's praising Judy Holliday, her character strength, at the same rate he's You know, when he was brought out to Hollywood, it was very much for that standard of
Good question.
Atlantic talk. Yeah, that was very interesting. What else?
We have time for one more. Seth asks, can you talk about Cucor's version of A Star is Born and why he was chosen to direct the Wellman remake?
Great question. So Cukor directed the film What Price Hollywood? That is the title of the film from 1932. And that film is the predecessor to A Star is Born. And so the 1937 A Star is Born, Cukor was offered but turned it down because he had directed What Price Hollywood and didn't want to tread the same ground again, at least not at that time, when he had a lot of films to choose from and he was getting really big as a director and directing many films a year. In What Price Hollywood, it's a little bit different. There's no music in it. And she is, the main character is a waitress who wants to become big. And it's not her husband, but her director who goes down the path of alcoholism and failure. And she ends up going off with her man and just breaking with Hollywood because she doesn't want to die for Hollywood, for stardom. And so that's kind of the predecessor to the film that has the paired characters, one going up and one going down. And so he didn't want to just direct the 1937 film, but by the time Judy Garland came around, one, he wasn't getting as many offers as Hollywood was breaking up after the HUAC investigations, after the Red Scare and stuff. Hollywood was breaking up, and as the studios broke up, he got fewer offers. He didn't have this steady supply as the contracts ended, and it was bargaining for each film, number one. But also number two, again, it's that opportunity to work with somebody who's a good actress, who wants to come back. It's a challenge. It's a strong woman. And he felt, along with Judy Garland's husband, Sidney Luft, that this could be the comeback film for her. And he had worked with her just a little bit when she was young on Wizard of Oz, when he directed a few scenes. But, everybody loved Judy Garland. She was an incredible talent, and he really wanted to work with her. He was incredibly angry about the film too. He felt it was his singular masterpiece. It was the best film he ever made, and Hollywood cut it up and butchered it. Hollywood took out a lot of things that made the scenes flow one to another and gave you backstory and background that made it work, and just kept in all the big musical numbers. And they added that whole Born in a Trunk section to the film. He didn't even direct that, where she's singing Swanee and she's kind of doing blackface without the blackface, and she's singing, and she does multiple numbers within that number where she's on a stage within a film. He didn't direct any of that, and he was very angry, so that the version that you can watch now has some of those scenes put back in with whatever they could find. So sometimes it's just a still photo and you hear the dialogue because they've still got some audio recordings of it, and some of the scenes are put back in. But he felt really strongly about doing it, and then also really horrified that Hollywood, that they had taken that power away from him and didn't trust him to make a great film. But he loved it, especially after losing Gone with the Wind all those years before. He felt very strongly about this. And so his relationship with Hollywood was very up and down. Some films he really enjoyed making, some films he hated making. And the films that he really enjoyed making, including Bhowani Junction, which is his Indian partition film. And I don't know anyone who even knows that George Cukor made an Indian partition film with Ava Gardner and Stuart Granger in it. They went and took that film apart and put a voiceover in it, and let Stuart Granger put a voiceover in what was supposed to, like Gone with the Wind, be a woman's film. It's supposed to be about Ava Gardner and how she chooses between the three men in her life. One who's Indian, one who's Indian and British, like her character is supposed to be, and one who's English. and white and English. And who is she going to choose? Of course, all those actors are played by white people, and we cringe, very whitewashed, creepy film. And Cucor says, he's a man of his era, and he kind of says, well, you know, it's not exactly burnt cork, but we did what we could, because the Indian people, they just couldn't act. And what he means is they have a completely different style of acting in Bollywood, right? And even in the 50s, it's a different style. And Cucor just put brown face on people. But it was supposed to, again, be a woman's film, and it was thrown to the man. So he had repeated experiences like that. But ultimately, I like to also just champion the fact that if he's a woman's director, it's because he's so good at what he does with these women, including Ava Gardner, who was the one in Bhawani Junction. And if he's an actor's director, there are brilliant scenes in every film, even if the films as a whole didn't thrill the audiences or don't hold up as well as we'd like.
Elyce Helford, thank you so much. I think we just hit our hour point, but I really appreciate it. Where can people buy your book?
So the book is on Amazon, as well as the University Press of Kentucky. If you go to elycehelford.com, which is my website, ELYCEHELFORD.com, you will find a link that says What Price Hollywood at the top, and it has a link to where you can buy the book, and it also has a link to other things. I did a couple of blogs on it or things like that, if anybody is interested in them. But if you do read it, let me know what you think. I'm really proud of it, but I had a lot of insecurities throughout it. So I recommend, if you've got an idea and you want to write, just do it. Don't hesitate. Do what you want to do, and then you can always find an editor. You can find people to read it who will share their thoughts with you.
Yes, great. Thank you so much. And yes, great note from Erica. Parnassus can order any book, special order. Support your local booksellers.
Support your local bookseller, and support Ann Patchett, who was, believe it or not, my creative writing teacher when she was a graduate student. And I was a grad student in literature, but I wanted to take one creative writing course. And of course, you couldn't take it from the big names. And Ann Patchett was a graduate student, was my teacher at the University of Iowa. So go buy your books there.
Yes. Well,
thanks to everyone for coming. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Good night, everybody. Come back to the next one. Stay in touch.
Take care. And
Bye.
thank you, Belcourt.